Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here, especially for this panel that is about to come out to the stage. My name is Jose Belen. I'm a United States Army combat veteran. 20 years old. In the spring of 2003, I deployed as part of the invasion into Iraq. That was done with one motive: to free a people that was being hurt by their very government. And at 20 years old, when you do something for the greater good, when you enlist for a nation with an obligation for the people, you must see that through. I turned 21 and 22 in the field of combat, served 14 consecutive months, lost some brothers out there, some sisters, watched the children die in front of you. 2005, I was honorably discharged from the United States Army, completed my 3-year enlistment. And when you come home, the things you see in combat, things you do, they don't stay there. They're here. And at 23 years old, I started a 14-year battle with post-traumatic stress disorder, psychological warfare. At 23, I was given my first round of pills from the VA. I did not know what PTSD was. However, I was told these medications will help you sleep, they will help you function, and you will be okay. Unfortunately, by the time we get to the VA, we're already depressed, we're suicidal. And for a lot of these medications, what they do, they push you closer to the edge, closer to pulling that trigger. And that's exactly what I've battled for 14 years. I am here to raise awareness to a national tragedy. Now, we know the number 22 veterans today ending their lives. We've heard that. We need to go past that number. But what we also need to know is that that number is no longer veterans only. Active duty military men and women are committing suicide. We had over 300 suicides within the active duty ranks in 2018 alone, with the United States Marine Corps experiencing their highest rate of suicide at 57. Since 2012, we have lost over 1,800 active duty military men and women on top of the veterans. Now, the question I pose to the United States government at this time is a true and raw question. We know cannabis is a healing medicine. Cannabis is a medicine that has allowed me to function as a man, a father, husband, community member. Why at this time, as I stand here at this podium, are we dispensing pills, medications that we know will cause an overdose today? CDC has that number at 130. We clearly know these pills push us closer to suicide. Why today are we choosing to do that and give access to cannabis? A medicine that has been around from the beginning of time. I think to just get it all out there, we can do better as a people. The government can do better for all of us. There's no reason why every hour a veteran should be committing suicide. It is time that we realize veterans were there for you. Now it's time for you to be there for them. Before I introduce the panel, I want to leave you with a quote from General Douglas MacArthur. And please take this with you when you leave here and remember. The soldier above all prays for peace, for it is the soldier who must suffer and bear the deepest wounds and scars of war. So it is my honor to introduce Megan Myers, the senior reporter of the Army Times.
All right. right, everybody. So, welcome to Thank You for Your Service. When will Congress let veterans use medical cannabis? I am Megan Myers. I'm the senior reporter at Army Times, and I'm joined by Melissa Bryant from Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Dan Englund from Can America, and Dr. Sue Sisley from the Scottsdale Research Institute. So we're going to start off by having you guys all introduce yourselves, your backgrounds, what brings you to this conversation about veterans and cannabis use. We'll have some questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor for as long as possible, basically, to for anybody who has questions. So,
hi everyone, I'm Melissa Bryant. I am the Chief Policy Officer for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and I am also an Army veteran. I served as a military intelligence officer for about 9 years, went over to the Pentagon as a civil servant for several years after that, and then found my way over to advocacy, where we, as a part of our Big Six policy priorities, advocate for cannabis for veterans. Overwhelmingly, 90% of our members at IAVA want to see cannabis research, 90%. 83% want to be able to use it as an effective treatment for marijuana, for any medicinal purposes like PTSD, chronic pain, things like that. And then for the first time in 5 years we've been asking this question, 55% of our members have said that they want to see it for recreational use. We know that that's not the bridge just yet. We're arguing for cannabis for vets now because we know that there's a nexus between things like chronic pain, the things that lead to veteran suicide and military suicide. There's a lot of potential that's within cannabis that we want to see go forward.
Thanks. Dan Englund, first and foremost, I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran, 1988, 1992, so I just dated myself pretty well. I'm the founder and CEO of Can America Brands Corporation, a publicly traded company in both Canada and the United States. Our ticker in Canada is CANA, and in the US it's CNNXF. I was a founder and owner of Edipure, which was the first regulated cannabis gummies manufacturer ever. Our license was 00001 in the state of Colorado, which was the first place to issue actual licenses. So I've been doing this a long time. We've had operations in multi-states for many years, and Can America is now in Colorado, Nevada, and Maryland, with more to come.
My name is Sue Sisley. I'm a physician from Arizona. I practice internal medicine, and I'm also a principal investigator at Scottsdale Research Institute. We focus on clinical trials looking at smoked and vaporized cannabis flower, and we do a variety of FDA-approved trials, but we're best known for this study looking at military veterans with PTSD. We're the first and only randomized controlled trial in the world that actually studied cannabis as a potential treatment for PTSD. So it took us 10 years to get through that laborious process. That's the sad reality of trying to do clinical trials on cannabis efficacy in the US, is that there's tons of layers of government red tape that only cannabis has to deal with. No other Schedule I drugs are forced to deal with this kind of bureaucratic hassles. So I'm excited. But we do other studies looking at cannabis for chronic pain, cannabis as a substitution for opioids. And I've been working with military veterans in our medical clinic now for 20 years, and they've taught me most of what I know about cannabis as a medicine. Before then, I was very skeptical. I just believed cannabis was dangerous and addictive, and they taught me about their personal experiences using cannabis as a treatment for pain, PTSD, and that's why we embarked on this journey to do rigorous controlled trials to understand more and help change public policy, hopefully.
all right, wonderful. And Sue's assistant here is Dodger, in case anybody is wondering. Yes. So I want to start out with kind of a general question, asking each of you, what's sort of your primary line of effort right now? What's the number one thing that you're trying to get out of your area here with cannabis?
Mm-hmm. Well, for us, I think we're all pretty much complementary in that through the policy work that we do at IAVA, we want to, push legislation. We are in support of the VA Medicinal Cannabis Research Act, which, make sure my mic is good here, which made it out of committee last year. It was the first federal bill focused on cannabis specifically that made it out of committee last year. It has strong bipartisan support. It was reintroduced in the 116th, and we are strong proponents of that, along with a coalition of other veteran service organizations who want to be able to see this as an effective treatment and see it at least studied by the VA. Because right now there's convoluted policy that states that either you can talk to your provider, but your provider won't recommend it to you. Many feel stigmatized in even talking to their providers at the VA. So there's a lot to unpack there, and we want to be able to allow for veterans to have that use. This is just one of, I think this year there have been 25 bills already introduced. And last year there were 60 bills introduced. And I know we had many other members of Congress speaking today. There's really a groundswell in this movement right now. We want to ensure that we finally make 2019 the year in which these legislations pass.
So as a company, our focus, of course, has been growing our business and creating brand awareness. As a original licensee in this regulated industry, I've always really wanted to see veterans do what I did and get directly involved, but there's punitive measures that happen. While I'm not currently going to the VA hospital for treatment, I have bought many homes in my lifetime utilizing my earned benefit of a VA loan, and once I got into this industry that was denied, so my earned benefit, which was earned, not given to me, is no longer mine. So there are a couple of different bills going through Congress right now, and I'm not advocating for those, but I think that they're a good start to fix, right? Like, I'm personally advocating, but I'm not professionally advocating. But what I am doing is working with different groups and different people with the same interests to create potentially an accelerator program for veterans so that when they get out of the service, they understand that the cannabis industry is a place where perhaps their skill sets and their experience and the way that they engage and behave themselves is valued. I think that when we get out of the military, we don't really know how to utilize our experience in the civilian world. I was an armorer. My primary experience was rapid fire machine guns and guided missile systems. So where do I go to get a job in that when I get out? And I think I did what most other veterans did. I got a job at the mall as a security guard. And it's primarily because I didn't know what else to do. So lots of us become law enforcement officers, lots of us become security personnel or truck drivers or something. And those are all great, careers, but there is hundreds of thousands of jobs and opportunities for entrepreneurship. I think veterans are the right people to take chances. We happen to have this kind of personality trait where we like to really take risk. So, being a business owner is something that makes sense, I think, for most veterans. And being in the cannabis industry makes a lot of sense for a lot of veterans, except for the fact that you could potentially lose all the things that you earned. And even though there's a bill to protect us from that, that's not what's happening on a daily basis. So I think with that, I'll turn over to Sue. Yeah. She's probably got important stuff.
I think we first, when I lost my first veteran to suicide in my medical practice, it really woke me up to how pathetic the treatment that we offer folks. There's only 2 medications that have ever been FDA approved for PTSD, Zoloft and Paxil, and those are disappointing. When those fail, we end up pummeling these veterans and other PTSD patients with, hundreds of other prescriptions that are not tested for PTSD. We use them off-label, and I can see why these folks end up feeling so demoralized. They just get put through the gauntlet of all these really toxic meds that aren't very effective, and then they end up taking their life. So I feel like we have not seen a new treatment for PTSD on the market in 17, 18 years now, if you can believe it. So that's why we're so desperate to study cannabis as a potential treatment, because we need to uncover new medicines that will help these folks, and right now there doesn't look like the pharmaceutical company is investing much energy into this. So if botanical medicines might offer that hope that we need, and specifically cannabis, the issue though for the veterans is that we cannot change the VA's thinking without randomized controlled trials that will hopefully get flower through the entire FDA drug development process. So that's what we're squarely focused on at Scottsdale Research Institute, is trying to put flower, the actual dry bud material, smoked and vaporized flower, through the entire FDA process, phase 1, 2, 3, and get it on the market with an FDA indication if the data supports that. And that's the question, is there data, will we generate data that shows that smoked or vaporized flower has efficacy for veterans? Certainly, the veterans community has been telling me for years that this helps them. It's the only thing that's worked for them. But lawmakers are dubious, and without data from controlled trials, we're not going to be able to change policy. But what we talked about earlier was the issue of the study drug that we are forced to use from our government. Remember, when you do a FDA controlled trial in the US, you must purchase cannabis from the federal government. And this cannabis is so low quality that all of us in the science community are worried that this is sabotaging the results of data from these trials. And that's why you wonder why these patients are reporting such transformative experiences with cannabis, that it's reporting that it saved their life, but yet the trials published in medical journals are not showing that. They're not representing that kind of transformation, and we think it's because we're forced to start with this really suboptimal plant material. This is, kind of a moldy cannabis. It's diluted with stems, sticks, leaves, and so it's sort of like garbage in, garbage out. If you're using this as your starter material, then of course all these studies, the results are going to be sabotaged by this. So I think that's my one hope today, is that I can convey to you guys that if we can put our energy into ending this monopoly. This is the University of Mississippi has enjoyed this government-enforced monopoly since 1968. They've been the only federally legal drug supply for every single controlled trial in the US that you've seen published. So if you wonder why the data looks so anemic, that's probably a big part of it.
And also, without having your data, we have our members who come to us anecdotally and talk about the transformative nature of using cannabis, whether it's, the THC blend or CBD, but it leaves them alone and unafraid to have to go through trial and error and to figure out what works for them. For example, for PTSD, would you necessarily want to use a sativa blend that might heighten your senses? Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. But going through that trial and error process is not something we want our veterans to do. We want them to be able to talk with their providers, talk with their clinicians without shame or punitive damages, benefits. I'm very glad that you said that, Dan. Earned benefits. We fought in battle, and we fought in training in order to support our nation, so we should be able to reap those benefits we earned. But also we want to make sure that we're not sending off veterans to try to self-medicate, because unfortunately we are a vulnerable community and we do have a propensity to self-medicate, whether it's through drugs, alcohol, and other things. And these are also part of the cycle of despair, as I call it. These are contributing factors that can lead to someone to have suicidal ideation if they don't see hope and they're randomizing through their own self-trial of what works for them. And we don't want to see someone go down that path. And then lastly, to Dan's point, I want to also say that first, you don't have to be an 88 mic or go be a security guard or something like that just because you got your CDL as a truck driver. There are many other jobs, and so there are resources out there through veteran service organizations like IAVA to help with that. But there's a booming industry of veterans, small business owners, like when you first started out, who live in ag states, live in agricultural states, and thanks to the Farm Bill now, with CBD being a part of that, we're seeing more and more veterans start their own businesses, at least in growing hemp. And if they could be able to expand beyond that, then that would give an opportunity for where veterans are, because by and large we're from the Southeast and the Midwest, where they are, in order to be able to participate in the cannabis industry and have some of that profit in addition to not losing their earned benefits from the VA.
That's a great program. And, you know, it's not just entrepreneurship, it's just a career choice as well. And so I've been comparing the accelerated program to like a small business administration thing. But the problem is, you know, most active duty military joined at a very young age.
Yes.
I was 17 when I joined the Marine Corps. So,
Same here.
you know, I basically became an adult through the absolution of everything that the military trains you in. It's very clear, right and wrong, yes or no. And so when I got out 4 years later, at the ripe old age of 21, I wasn't about to seek out organizations' help. I wasn't really looking for different organizations. And I think that's the hard part, right?
It is. And many feel that same way when you first get out and you say, I'm done, I don't want to have any military affiliation. We especially see that at IAVA as we represent the post 9/11 generation, which is now almost an entire statistical generation that's been at war. At least training for war, refitting, going back into the theater of operations multiple times. And so when they come out, we do see a lot who want to leave the community, but usually after about 5 years, they'll want to come back. And when they do come back, they try to come into the fold of organizations that will speak toward their interests.
So the question for Melissa, when you're speaking to members of Congress and you go and sit down with them, does it ever fall along party lines or regional lines about who is more interested in this issue, more prone to support it than others? And does the veterans interest group idea ever kind of perk anybody's ears up more than just the idea of the general population using cannabis?
Yeah, big of a loaded question, but yes, there's certainly different aspects of the cannabis industry that appeal to different sides of the aisle. By and large, on the Republican side, GOP members are seeing, at the very least, from the small business perspective, from the helping veterans perspective, from, look, let's just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks to help with the opioid epidemic, with the suicide epidemic. All of these things we know at least see what the efficacy is in cannabis. And so we're finding more and more who were against it for social reasons, who at least have a soft spot for veterans and are signing on to bipartisan landmark legislation. And I feel very confident that at least one of the bills out of the 25 that have already been introduced so far in the 116th Congress will get through. For the Democrats, I'll say bluntly, it's never really been an issue, although it depends on where you are. If you're a formerly known as Blue Dog Democrat, if you're living in a state like West Virginia or Missouri or somewhere else, they also now see that the tide is turning. Mostly through state referendums. Sometimes the people are saying, well, we voted for this anyway. And so it will behoove you then too, behoove, that's an Army word, but sorry, can't take it out the girl. But it would make sense for you then to lobby in favor of your constituency who have stated that they want this. There's no denying when you have 33 states, the District of Columbia, and territories that now have decriminalized cannabis for medicinal use, and many more who are joining on a daily basis who want to see it for recreational use as well. We just want to see it well regulated, and we want to ensure, particularly within the veterans community, not just IAVA, but other advocates who want to ensure that it is safe and that it is effective, because we don't want to have veterans self-medicating. Unfortunately, we've had that for far too long, probably as long as the military's existed.
So, Sue, you were talking about your research, particularly with the University of Mississippi's product that you're allowed to use. Beyond changing that dynamic and being able to test on something else, do you see any openings for testing on CBD oil or other cannabis products? Because that's what we're talking about here. We're not just talking about smoking marijuana. There's many, avenues that you could take to use cannabis.
No, you're right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity if the funding is available. So that's the key. These studies, the controlled trials that the legislature and health departments demand are so expensive to do. The study that we just completed, the FDA trial I was telling you about with veterans with PTSD that took us 10 years to finish, that study was $2.3 million project, and that's only 76 military veterans. So you can see as the studies get larger, there are more subjects, there are more secondary tests, you can expand into $4 or $5 million phase 2 trials. When you get to phase 3, you're looking at $30 million. So it's essential that the government change the balance of funding, because right now over 90% of the funds to look at cannabis are all safety studies, right? Looking at harmful side effects of cannabis or addiction potential of cannabis. But if you dare want to study efficacy, that how effective is cannabis at treating a certain illness, that's where the government money is lacking. And we have to, as taxpayers, we need to demand that our government change, that start shifting the balance of these funds into looking at efficacy, into doing controlled trials on how does cannabis work for treating this illness or that illness. We've got all these legal states, we've got millions of patients with legitimate clinical questions about how do they harness the medical potential of cannabis, and we don't have good answers for them yet. And that's why it's so crucial that all of us come together and start, create a groundswell of pressure on the government to fund these trials. I'll tell you, there's a shining example in Michigan. They just passed an adult use ballot initiative for cannabis legalization in Michigan. But the great thing was they allocated now $40 million towards studying military veterans, doing controlled trials on cannabis for treatment of veterans with PTSD and suicidality. And I think that ballot initiative language should be a national model, and all initiatives in the future should include funding for veterans research, because it's unconscionable the fact that our allies like Canada and Israel are providing cannabis for free to veterans, right? They're not just providing safe legal access to their vets, but the federal government is fully sponsoring the cost of that cannabis medicine in Canada and Israel. And I think that's a really important bar that we should be reaching, but we're not going to be able to do it without those trials. So,
well, and to that point about Canada, I mean, active duty military can consume, unless they're a pilot scheduled to fly. I mean, literally scheduled to fly.
Right.
So, I had Stuart Varney, I was on Varney & Co., and he says, you're not advocating for active duty military, are you? I'm like, well, why not?
Why not?
When I was 17 years old, I was drinking in every bar on Camp Pendleton. and that's not a lie, right? I wasn't being carded, and I was encouraged. We had a game we called Top Fuel, which was a funnel with a very long hose where somebody stood on top of a building and poured a bottle of Jack Daniels in it, and you had the other end of the funnel in your mouth. And this was regular behavior that was included my supervisors, right? So, this is not, I think, something that should be ignored when it comes to active military. I think Jose gave some numbers that are pretty disturbing about active duty military suicides. And again, it goes back to how absolute our lives are at such a young age of what's right and wrong and what's okay and what's not okay.
Right. We were talking earlier backstage, not even about PTSD treatment, but just the number of people who are downrange right now using Ambien to sleep at night, taking painkillers because their knees, their backs, their necks hurt. But they could not, in those circumstances, use something that's less addictive, has less side effects, has fewer side effects than those medications.
Absolutely. I mean, I can remember going to the clinic downrange and saying I can't sleep. I was working on a weird swing shift where my circadian rhythm's basically been off for the last 20 years, thanks to the military. But they give it to you like Pez. There's no qualms about saying, oh, you can't sleep here, take an Ambien. Next thing you know, you're sleepwalking in the middle of the night in Baghdad. So that's probably not good.
And
But
you could very well be going out on a patrol or a mission the next day,
Yeah.
operating all of your heavy equipment, having, used Ambien the night before.
absolutely. And then if you're, a woman soldier like I was, there's no accounting for dosage. And so, they may say, you might want to break this in half, you think? Because otherwise it's not going to leave my system for probably 24 hours. And to your point, I can see some of my Marine friends in the audience now laughing about memories of boot and can actually attest to a lot of what you're saying, but it is so inculcated in our culture. Mm-hmm. We have that drinking culture, we have that self-medicating culture within the military, and if there's something that can stem that from both the time when you are in active duty as well as you transition over as a veteran, then that's what we need to be working toward. And you're absolutely right. Our friends in the North, in the Canadian Forces, I've done a lot of work with them throughout my career. They figured out a policy. Mm-hmm. They figured out a policy that works, that accounts for consumption, just like alcohol or anything else that you would use. Any prescription drugs that are controlled substance, same rules apply. And so there's a smart way of doing this. And the IDF is also another valid point, Sue, in that we have a conscripted service, men and women. We look to them for many lessons learned of what works within a military force that's conscripted, and especially for a lot of lessons learned for women in combat. And I think that that is something that deserves to be studied more, or not just even studied more, but looking at the policy and how we can implement that for our armed forces.
Sue, you were mentioning earlier where states have legalized marijuana in Michigan, putting some money down to do this research. Is there an avenue to go to California, to go to Colorado, Massachusetts, and ask them, hey, the next time you're putting together your budget, what do you think about research for some of these things?
I think it's crucial to get it into the initiative language before it gets passed, because once these models are approved, it's tough to squeeze any dollars out of them later. But I think if there's enough states, new states that are coming online, writing initiatives now, that I'm hoping we can work with all the national organizations and let them know that this should be an essential part of any language that comes out going further. And I think the benefit of having VSOs, the veteran service organizations like IAVA that have come out so courageously in support of this are just, they have all of my praise, because there's very few VSOs that are willing to step out on this and talk openly. The American Legion finally, after years of lobbying them, we finally got them to pass that resolution about ending barriers to research, but they're still very reluctant to talk openly about, demanding VA physicians write certifications for veterans. And there's one really good example in Illinois. If any of you have looked at the law in Illinois, allows veterans to bypass the doctor's certification and actually just ship their medical records to the Department of Health. And if they have a qualifying condition on their medical records, then they will receive a card. And I think that is an important model that we should replicate in all the legal states, because let's face it, the chance of these veterans being able to get a doctor's certification without having to pay a ton of money is really challenging. And so I think Illinois, I really commend them for being the first state to do this. That happened years ago, by the way, and it's not like we don't see the floodgates opening, and the veterans are using that process very responsibly, and it's a good working model for other states to adopt.
And other states are coming. Believe it or not, there's an initiative that's building in Texas, of all places, right now, similar to Michigan. And so there's a lot that's happening at the state level that we see a lot of potential in. And then there's also the Safe Harbor Act, which is another piece of legislation that's been introduced in the 116th. And in that one, it will allow for those who live in the decriminalized states in the District of Columbia to be able to at least use it for medicinal purposes without any punitive action toward them for their VA benefits.
But it needs to allow them to also be involved in the industry.
Of course.
Right? So for commercial purposes or career, but at the same time, hurry up, let's just end this whole charade in the first place, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd say, for IAVA, and thank you for your praise, Sue, and likewise, we follow your work very closely as well. It's something where you're seeing a sea change happen with cannabis as rapidly as I liken it to don't ask, don't tell. Don't ask, don't tell changed, I mean, when you consider social movements and how long it takes over time, thinking back to like the civil rights movement and things like that, don't ask, don't tell changed from a policy to being repealed as policy within 10 years. And I know that seems like forever, but in a very short life cycle, especially within Washington, D.C., that's a huge movement to then see a policy reversal within a decade. I foresee the same thing happening with cannabis, because we're already 2/3 of the way there at the state level.
So beyond just use, Dan, earlier you were talking about the cannabis industry as an option for veterans leaving service. So what is their entry point there? Are you out there looking for them, or if they're interested, how do they get involved?
I haven't met very many veterans in the industry in Colorado. I've tried to hire as many of them that didn't already have a business, but you know, I don't think there is some kind of path of entry. I think most veterans feel like if they become, so if you Google my name, I've been a lobbyist for cannabis issues in multiple states for 10 years. So I've had a lot of bank accounts shut down, and I've had numerous things denied because I'm so public. And I think most veterans are very concerned about being on a list.
Absolutely.
I've asked multiple times whether or not being in the industry will prevent me from getting a concealed carry, and I've gotten no real answer. But I also refuse to lie on the federal firearms application, right, as far as my use of illegal drugs. So I haven't purchased a firearm in over 10 years, right? And this is a denial of my Second Amendment right based on something that is, as I said earlier, just a charade. We're pretending now, right? 20 years ago we were convinced, now we're just pretending. And you see many of these folks who have been pretending are now jumping into these big, large corporations that are now doing mergers and acquisitions with people like Speaker Boehner on their board, right? So, there is no real action plan, and I think that's what myself and a couple of other groups have been talking about is how can you educate the veteran that this is an option for them as a career when they come out, and there are people who are looking for people with their skill sets and their integrity and their work ethic, and how can you make it very clear to them that they have them, but at the same time, what risks are they taking by getting a badge? Right? Because you get a badge, you're on a state list. You have to have a badge to work in the industry, no matter what the state is, which includes criminal background check, credit check, all of these other types of things. So,
and you bring up a very good point also on what is the Venn diagram of veterans, in that there's a very much of a libertarian streak. And so you have those who want to be able to support cannabis, whether it's in the industry or just to use it personally, as well as those who are in favor of their Second Amendment rights. That's that Venn diagram of where veterans sit right in the middle. And so anything where you have to self-report in that regard, which I'm glad you're not violating federal law, but anything where you'd have to self-report would have veterans very skittish of reporting that. And then I'll also point out that 1/3 of our veterans, because of deliberate initiatives, especially during the Obama administration, to move into federal work, 1/3 of our federal workforce are veterans. Well, OPM doesn't allow for that, the Office of Personnel Management. And then if you have clearance work, which as many who are maybe truck drivers who have a CDL, who then go into long-distance truck driving as their profession, for me it was intelligence. And so I didn't know where I was going to go and spy, the civilian world, but I at least knew that I could move from government over to working in the Pentagon, working in intelligence directorates and agencies. And so in doing that, you're automatically out of the game for this. And so there needs to be a way in which you're rectifying for the 1/3 of federal workers who are veterans also.
it's a very good point. The NRA too, right? So I'm a life member of the NRA, and when I was in the Marine Corps, I was a primary marksmanship instructor, a range safety officer, and an armorer, which means I was a gunsmith. But the NRA won't fight for my right because now I'm a consumer of cannabis. and part of the commercial cannabis industry. So they call me asking for money, but they don't respond to my emails asking them why they want to support my rights. Right?
Yeah, there's some state-by-state efforts. I don't know if you saw, there was a bill in Maryland that was trying to protect cannabis card holders and how to protect their gun rights. And the local NRA chapter did support that. But on the national level, you're right, the NRA has not stepped up. Yeah. So that's disappointing. So we may just have to go state by state. But I think that's one really big untold story about the regulated cannabis industry is that most veterans that we work with don't ever enter the regulated market because it's too treacherous. They're afraid of losing the VA benefits, losing gun rights, and paying exorbitant prices, and it's really tough.
And to that point, if you go to iava.org/survey, again, it's iava.org/survey, and you can find a lot of the statistics that I have on my handy cheat sheet here that I've been rattling off. But with our veterans, they state that 20% actually use cannabis medicinally, but 31% of member respondents said that they have not talked with their doctor or clinician or provider about it. Melissa Bryant's take, that number is way higher than 31%. It's way higher, and we know that because they're probably even afraid, even though we strip PII. Oh, I'm sure. We strip PII from our surveys. It's completely confidential. Your name is never out there. But again, that skittishness you talk about of just entering your name into a computer and self-reporting, that's something that veterans just won't do. And so you're probably right. It's probably 100%.
Could be close to 100%. I mean, we understand how these things work, right? So you put yourself on a list and somebody's getting it. And that's what's happening when you sign up for these medical programs. No matter how much they say they scrub the data, you're not going to convince veterans that the VA is not going to get that. Right?
Again, it's in that Venn diagram of libertarian streak that's within the veteran community. But again, I keep coming back to what you opened with, and it's something that we believe wholeheartedly within our core principles at IVA and what our members believe in, and that is you earned these benefits. Right. You earned them through your service. You earned them being able to go off to fight for your country before you're even able to have a legal drink. In some cases, before you're even able to vote. And this is a right that's being denied to you. And earn benefits that are possibly going to be in jeopardy because of you seeking treatment that won't have you zonked out for what seems like all of eternity, which unfortunately many of our members and many veterans feel.
So coming from research, from business, from policy, what are some of the ways that you guys can team up and work together? For instance, on policy about guaranteeing a veteran's benefits, even if you are in the cannabis industry or if you are using it in a legal framework?
Well, for us, I'd say go to iava.org and then you'll see our supported legislation. There's always a button that says take action. Let your members of Congress know. The two bills I mentioned, there's, again, 23 others that are on the slate for the 116th right now. There will be more. Let your members of Congress know. Tell your friends and get 5 more friends to let your members of Congress know. Even if they're civilians, if you support for those who have fought for their country, or at least raised their hands and said, send me, we should be able to do that. And so that's something where I would love to partner with Sue. Again, we follow your research. Your research is a part of what I do in advocacy. When I meet with VA senior officials, when I meet with DOD senior officials, we need that data included with our member data and other data that's out there to show this is something that has at least something that's evidence-based. It may not be data-driven yet, but it is evidence-based. And we need to aggregate that and put that into the mosaic of all the knowledge we currently have in cannabis and pushing this forward until it is law.
Well, for me, if you have an advisory board or something, I'd love to work on it. Yeah. I'm really mad that Sue's receiving moldy cannabis because in Colorado, Nevada, and Maryland, you can't sell moldy cannabis. You can't transfer moldy cannabis. You can't even keep it in your facility. So that's ridiculous that that's what she's receiving, and somebody should be fined for that, because that's what happens to the cannabis industry is you receive fines if you violate these molds.
It's really sad that right here in DC you could call a delivery service
It's
right now and
ridiculous.
get better quality bud than what you would get from University of Mississippi.
Well, and what's ridiculous is all of the regulations that we have on us because we're criminals who are just acting like we're normal businesses, right? That's how they treat us. But yet the government's grow is sending moldy weed for research. Like I can't even believe that. So
As Sue has said, they know it, and the way that you feel is that it's on purpose that you get that product.
It feels
Have you sent it to a
deliberate.
lab
Yeah, oh
for
yeah. It
testing?
feels like a
They have
part of their
mycobutanil
strategy.
or Eagle
No,
20?
it didn't. In our testing, we didn't show the presence of mycotoxin, which is why we felt comfortable to move forward with it. But we were really disappointed to find, over 100,000 colony-forming units of mold in most of the batches.
Unreal.
And the FDA releases this study drug to scientists, and like you said, it would have never passed state testing in any regulated market. So I think this is really astonishing and how do I, as a physician, that knowingly hand out moldy weed
It's
to our...
astonishing you can't get your hands on a regulated commercial grows product.
Right.
That's what's astonishing to me. So
But we need that FDA trial. We need that in order to move forward with the
That's-
VA. And it's so true. I just want to say, we have mold in military housing right now.
Right.
We've been living under a rock for the last few
Yeah.
months. You've seen the coverage of it. I know you've written about it. And so there's mold in military housing, and there is a public outrage, as there should be, because we shouldn't be poisoning our military and families, and you're receiving it for ingestion purposes.
well, they do a public shaming of cannabis businesses when they fail tests, right? So they do this recall that they put in the Denver Post. This is Colorado I'm talking about, and then you have to issue a press release by law admitting that you transferred cannabis that had something wrong with it that failed the test, and yet they're sending, is this the metal canisters they've been sending?
No,
out?
that's not what we get, but you're right, the federal patients have been receiving that, but we get, batches of loose raw flour in these bags that come, and we were the first scientists to actually send it for independent secondary testing to a DEA Schedule I licensed laboratory. We did 3 rounds of testing because we were so shocked by the initial results, and all of it showed excessively high levels of mold. So the big concern people have is really around mycotoxins, though, and we didn't test for all the mycotoxins, so it may have been present and we just weren't able to test for all of them. But the mycotoxins are we call it the poop that comes out of fungal material. The fungus produces mycotoxin, which are believed to be very dangerous to public health. So we don't, the bottom line though is we desperately need other growers for research. Scientists need access to options, right? If we're gonna do real world studies, understand how patients are using real world cannabis to treat their illnesses, we should have access to diverse phenotypes that are representative of these regulated markets so we can understand what's really happening. And the fact is we're not able to get the genetic diversity at the cultivation site at University of Mississippi, the only federally legal supply. We must keep pressure on the DEA to follow through on their pledge. They promised on the Federal Register back in 2016 that they would license other growers for research, and they have not moved 1 inch further in making good on this.
But why do they need to license other growers for research? There's 6,000 growers in Colorado alone, right? So I don't understand why they don't come to the industry and sample product out of the industry. I mean, they're making us. So this is turning into a different conversation. I'm just outraged that you're receiving.
We all
moldy
should be
cannabis.
outraged.
Because also what's happening is that, so at IVA, part of our other priorities, we fight toxic exposures, like from burn pits and airborne toxins in forward deployed areas and other operating bases, even in other theaters. We fight against water at Camp Lejeune, which is shown to have cancer clusters. We fight against all the toxins, lead from ammo and from firing rapidly. We have lead poisoning exposure now that we're discovering. I feel like I'm just going to drop dead one day when I walk out the door, just because I check the box for so many things I may have been exposed to because of the military.
Yeah.
I say that part sarcastically, and I say partly sarcastically, but it blows my mind that we're now, through the federal government, giving it for an ingestible purpose, a toxin.
For combustible.
A combustible mycotoxin, when we're fighting the external toxic exposures that are already in our systems and that we're suffering and dying from various ailments, whether it's pulmonary, respiratory, everything from asthma to rare cancers. And so the thing that's supposed to help is also poisoning us. That's the part that I find just insane.
So the products, so to circle back to your question, like what I'd like to be able to do with you, Sue, is provide you commercially made products that have been tested, right? And this is something that should be an option for you. You should be able to utilize all verticals of delivery mechanisms for testing. It shouldn't just be flour. There should be, oil. There should be different levels of oil. There should be finished product. There should be whatever your sample needs and how they want to ingest it. Or maybe even different tests for different ingestibles. And maybe that's how we get down the road to understanding how these cannabinoids affect people when they put them on their skin, when they ingest them, when they use them as beauty products, when they use them as bath salts. So to answer your question, I'd love to give her product, but apparently I can't.
Yeah, the challenge with the
Before we totally run out of time, we have microphones on either end if anybody wants to come up and ask a question. We've got a veteran over
We have a
on this
veteran
line.
over here.
Couple comments. I'm Jeff Staker with Hoosier Veterans for Medical Cannabis. First of all, on the battlefield, there's nobody that's protected and well taken care of than our medics and our corpsmen. And I want to applaud you, Dr. Sicily, for what you've done. I think this study is monumental. It's a big step forward. You're taking the point, and we've got your back. The veterans got your back.
Thank you, Jeff.
The other comment.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
The other comment I have is, maybe you can elaborate on this, but I always had this idea that the VA does not have to necessarily dispense or prescribe cannabis. Veterans that are on the pain management clinic are, taking the pills. I did to oxycodone for 10 years. Want to get off those pills. However, they take a urinalysis. If cannabis shows up in their urinalysis, they get taken off their opiates. Well, to get taken off their opiates, they're already addicted. They turn to street drugs, and the cycle goes on. However, what the VA can do, and maybe you can elaborate on this, is that veterans could probably work with their doctors to either admit that they're using cannabis, what kind of cannabis they're using, what's the potency of it, and work with them in reducing their opiate uses and eliminate it. The other thing is, what ailments are they using the cannabis for? The VA could start a database of the individuals, or not the names, but what they're taking the cannabis for, what strain, and then when other veterans come in, the doctors can consult with them and say, hey, this is what worked for veterans with this ailment. Would you like to take a look at it? Again, we can get it someplace else, but that's how the VA can work on it.
Right.
Have you heard anything in the makings?
And that's exactly what the legislation, the VA Medicinal Cannabis Research Act, should allow. It should clear up the confusion of what the current policy is. So by current policy, you are enabled as the veteran to talk to your provider at the VA, and you're able to say, I am using cannabis.
And absolutely.
But they will not talk back to you. They will take that down, they'll put it into their aggregated data, and they may give us, veteran service organizations and researchers a percentage of how many have self-reported, but as it stands, they won't be able to recommend, they can't prescribe anyway, they would not be able to recommend nor talk to you, especially down to the levels, sorry for the pun, into the weeds of what you're describing, and that's exactly what the problem is.
Right. I'm very open with my doctor from day one.
Good.
That's why I started my organization. But I lose my train of thought.
Well, let me make a point.
The other thing is, I got it. I'm getting calls from veterans, and I'm like, well, are you such and such? And I say, absolutely. How can I help you? He says, well, my doctor at the VA gave me your name and said that you can possibly point me in the right direction.
Right.
And there's a lot of VA doctors out there.
They're always well-intentioned, VA doctors.
Exactly.
Don't mention who it is by name, though. I don't want to get that
Absolutely,
good
I
Samaritan in
understand,
trouble.
I understand.
But,
I understand, but they're
no,
really
but no, you're
wonderful.
absolutely right. And I also like that you brought up the for lack of a better way of putting it, they also put you in a box if you were using opioids, as you said you were, and then you talk about your cannabis usage, then you're put in the pill seeker list, and you're taken off of any extra treatment at that point for pain management. And that's also detrimental because we need to ensure that you have something that is alleviating your pain. Dan, you wanted to?
I think my only point to his point is I'm very concerned about boxing us in with listing ailments and requiring physician aid. Most veterans or most military don't seek assistance until it's almost too late. And the thing we all have in common is the restless nights and the trouble sleeping, and that's when it starts. So what is that ailment? How do you get your doctor to prescribe you something because you're having trouble sleeping? And we all know, those of us who served, understand why you're having trouble sleeping. So I'm tired of the lists. This is what you can have cannabis for. Like, at what point is this a compound that's available to us because we're Americans and we're free, or we're veterans and we've earned it? That to me is the difference. I'm sick of the lists.
We've got another veteran here with a question.
Yeah, a guy over here too.
All right, we've got time for one more question, so whoever jumps there first.
Hey, how you doing?
win.
My name is Rayford Smith Sr. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I spent 2 months in Medellin, Colombia, because I was working with the VA, and I suffered from PTSD, and it was just difficult for them to listen about me using cannabis, so I just left the country. But my question is that, is there a way that we can get these politicians and everyone to, I guess I want to say, smoke with us? Because it's like they go to Iraq and Afghanistan, for the dog and pony show, put on a flat jacket, Kevlar, make it cool. So it's like, come smoke with us and see for yourself. You understand what I'm saying? I was at the VA. I got back March 8th. I went to the VA about 2 weeks ago. My psychiatrist for my PTSD, he said, I got 20 pills that I can offer you for your PTSD. I was just at the VA on Tuesday talking to an internist, and I told him, I smoke cannabis. And he was like, oh, really? Like, my girlfriend, she's trying to get in that industry too. And I was like, that's interesting. But yeah, are we willing to be brash and bold to invite these people who don't smoke to come smoke so they can see for themselves? Can we get to that point? Because this is ridiculous. I mean, we know what it can do. We know how it can help people across the board. Yeah. And I just want to say, I fought so everybody can smoke. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, see, this guy, yeah.
All right, at least create some sort of,
bold, if that's cool.
Yeah.
at least create some sort of 101 to bring to them and show them these are all the different things and this is how it affects you, and so that there's more education other than no marijuana, absolutely not.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are folks who will want to do it. They want to get reelected, of course, but I'm sure that there are who are amenable. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, cannabis is more popular than all politicians put together, and I think all religions put together now too. But this gentleman is talking about the same exact kind of thing that I mean. First of all, folks who've been in the military are impulsive. So when he felt pressure, he moved to Colombia, right? And second of all, what he wants them to have that personal connection with him, and that's what we do in this community of veterans and military personnel. Is we built that camaraderie, and that's where I've been screaming into the wind that I'm tired of this bullshit for a long time. And oh, pardon me. Sorry, Mom. So, I mean, this is, he's very on point with what the frustrations are. Right. But that's not how this works unless one day Donald Trump wakes up and tweets that weed's legal. And I hope that happens very quickly. I was thinking of tweeting to him. Order. If somebody would just tweet to him that Joe Biden wants to make it legal, maybe he'll do that.
All right, well, that's a good place for us to head into the future from here. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Hey, and I'll say to you, you're a part of that number when I say 31%, and it's really 100%. You're the reason why we know that number is skewed. So thank you for having the courage to say that.
Exactly.
Thank you guys.